All right, well, hello everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning to talk about the head of the Neponset Sole Source Aquifer Groundwater Restoration Grant Opportunity. This grant opportunity is utilizing funds from a natural resource damages settlement from the Blackburn and Union Privileges site in Walpole, Massachusetts. My name is Michelle Craddock. I am MassDEP's Natural Resource Damages Program Coordinator. We'll be giving the presentation. Kathy Kiley from MassDEP will also be joining us. She manages the state's emergency response program and also assists with NRD contracting. And she'll help me answer any questions you have. I have about 27 slides and plan to talk for about 25 minutes. And then there'll be time for questions at the end. So just a couple notes on meeting format. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box and I'll answer them at the end. There'll also be time at the end to ask questions out loud. And just a note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted along with the PowerPoint and questions and answers on our website. Just to give you a brief overview of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the purpose of this meeting. That's really to serve as an informational session about the grant opportunity. I'll then give an overview of the Natural Resource Damages Program, including an overview of the trust resources and the authorities of this program. Then talk through the restoration process that we have gone through with the Blackburn and Union NRD settlement funds, including the funds we have available for this grant opportunity and the restoration categories that we're looking to fund. I'll then talk about eligibility, including the geographic focus area and the applicants that are eligible to apply. I'll then walk through the grant application, including the timeline, application tips and requirements, selecting applications, how we review them, including the eligibility criteria and evaluation criteria. And then I'll talk about how we actually go about awarding grants. And then finally, we'll have time for questions. So like I said, the purpose of this meeting really is an informational session to provide information about the grant announcement and application. The communications that we have today really can't provide feedback regarding potential projects, but I can answer, basic questions about, how we would rank projects and evaluate them. Like I said, we will have question and answer sections at the end of the presentations. And additionally, questions can be submitted in writing until March 8th, 2023 at 5 p.m. So by law, certain state and federal agencies work on behalf of the public as trustees for natural resources. For the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Secretary of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs serves as the trustee for natural resources. Additionally, federal agencies can act as trustees for natural resources, including agencies such as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Additionally, federally recognized tribes can act as trustees for natural resources. So what natural resources are we talking about when we're talking about these trust resources? We're referring to biota, fish and wildlife. That could be specific species of fish, specific species of birds or wildlife, surface water, groundwater, air, soils, and sediments. We're also referring to the natural resource services that they provide. So services like fishing, hunting, and shellfishing, the habitat for wildlife, recreation, including things like recreational fishing, utilization of beaches, things like that, as well as spiritual or cultural uses of the resources and water supply. So when there is an oil spill or release of hazardous materials that impacts the environment, both cleanup and natural resource damage assessment occur. So the cleanup really determines the nature and extent of the contamination and then evaluates, selects, and takes actions to eliminate or reduce risks to human health and the environment. The natural resource damage assessment and restoration process is a separate process, but is related to the cleanup at certain points in the process. The point of this process really is to determine the type and extent of injuries to natural resources, the kind we discussed on the previous slide, and then to collect natural resource damages from liable parties. So So natural resource damages are essentially a dollar amount or a monetary amount that is used to compensate the public for those injuries. We then evaluate, select, and take actions to restore the natural resources to compensate the public. And so some important things to note with that is that natural resource damages settlement funds cannot be used to fund required cleanup activities. It's really intended to compensate the public above and beyond what's required by the cleanup. So just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about in terms of damages, since 1992, the Commonwealth has settled over 20 NRD claims worth over $70 million. As you can see from this table, the settlement amounts vary a lot based on the amount of injury to natural resources. So you can see here, Blackburn and Union Privileges site, we received a $1 million settlement. That's somewhere kind of in the middle of the different settlements that we've received since 1992. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about what that 1 million includes on a future slide. So just to give you an example of natural resource injury and restoration, I wanted to quickly highlight the Textron Mass Military Reservation site. And so at this site, hazardous substances injured groundwater in the Cape Cod sole source aquifer. This resulted in a $1.3 million NRD settlement with those funds to be used towards groundwater restoration projects. As part of that settlement and the restoration planning and implementation, the trustees funded 2 different projects to protect and conserve 19 acres of land for aquifer protection. Additionally, we funded water and wastewater management planning in towns that rely on the Cape Cod aquifer. So that included the Sagamore Lens Aquifer Sustainable Management of Water Resources Plan, as well as the Town of Sandwich Comprehensive Water Resource Management Plan. And so you can see here as this example that the injury has a very close nexus to the restoration that occurred. And that's a very important part of the natural resource damages process. There needs to be a nexus between the injured resource and the restored resource. So to focus in on the Blackburn and Union kind of settlement and the trustees that have been involved, the NRD settlement happened in 2011 with settlement with the responsible parties. Like I said, the trustees received $1 million for injury to surface waters, soil, and groundwater. $300,000 of that settlement is to be used for groundwater restoration, which is what we're talking about today. $575,000 was to be used for ecological restoration, and the remaining $125,000 to be used for ecological and groundwater restoration. As some of you might be familiar with, the majority of that $700,000 for ecological and ecological/groundwater restoration has been spent on both the Trap Hole Brook Watershed Restoration Initiative, including removal of the Trap Hole Brook Dam, on the Memorial Pond Wetland Restoration and Enhancement Project in Walpole, as well as funding of some work on preliminary design for culvert replacements. The NRD trustees for this case include the U.S. Department of the Interior, acting through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That's for the ecological claim only. And the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, acting through the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, represented by MassDEP. And that's for both the groundwater and the ecological claim. So the restoration process it's been going on for quite some time. And the restoration process really helps guide the trustees in selecting the types and timing of restoration projects. And this is a process that's required as part of the laws that allow us to conduct this process. So we started this a long time ago with kind of some consultation with other agencies, public meetings to brief people on the settlement and the types of restoration projects we were looking for. We worked to identify different restoration categories, do some feasibility and scoping on projects, and that work all resulted in a draft restoration plan and programmatic environmental assessment. And that draft restoration plan really laid out the types of projects that we wanted to fund using these funds, as well as the dollar amount we wanted to put towards those. That draft restoration plan then went out for public review and comment. and was then revised based on those comments, and a final restoration plan was issued in 2018. And like I said, this document really laid out the different restoration projects that we wanted to fund. In terms of the groundwater restoration projects, the restoration plan kind of said that this would occur via a competitive grant process that would happen in the future. And so that's where we are today. Kind of once this process happens and we have, potentially selected projects through the grant process, we will implement them, or, the applicants will implement them, and the trustees will continue to oversee and monitor the project performance. So I did want to kind of highlight those restoration categories that I mentioned before. Like I said, we have $300,000 in available funding for groundwater restoration projects in the following categories. And these categories were detailed in the restoration plan, which you can look at if you want additional information. And so the three categories are groundwater recharge, demand management, and integrated management. And so groundwater recharge projects are, projects that are really focused on protecting the quality of current and potential drinking water supplies through things like aquifer land conservation and protection, reducing losses of clean water to aquifers. So, infiltration and inflow projects, providing quality recharge to aquifers. So that might include, stormwater related projects. Demand management really focuses on projects that conserve water and reduce demand. So this could include things like water audits, leak detection surveys, infrastructure improvements, drought resiliency related projects, looking at water rates to encourage water conservation, as well as things like rebates for low flow water sense fixtures. And finally, the third category is integrated management, and that's really focused on projects that integrate planning and management of current and potential drinking water supplies and wastewater treatment. Additionally specified in the restoration plan was the geographic focus area that we would fund projects in. And so projects must be located in or benefit the head of the Neponset sole source aquifer. This aquifer includes most of Walpole and portions of Dover, Foxborough, Medfield, Norwood, Sharon, and Westwood. For those unfamiliar with the sole source aquifer, it is a designation by the US EPA that states that this is the principal source of drinking water for the residents of that area, that there's no viable alternative sources which can completely replace the drinking water supplies supplied by the aquifer. More information can be found out about this on EPA's website, which is linked on the slide. So who can apply for this grant opportunity? It's open to public entities, including state or local government, including county, municipality, local public authorities, school districts, special districts, district commissions, regional governments, or any agency or instrumentality of government and state authorities. It's also open to non-public entities, including individuals, partnerships, and corporations, both private, nonprofit, quasi-public, or corporate body politic. Organizations based outside the eligible geographic focus area are eligible to apply, so long as the proposed project takes place within the project area. Partnerships and collaborative efforts between organizations are encouraged, and eligible applicants may submit more than one application for distinct restoration projects. So for those that are unaware, the grant announcement and application is available both on MassDEP's NRD website, as well as on the Commonwealth's procurement website, also known as ComBuys. There are some kind of tips for locating this bid if you do look on ComBuys on the screen. This is the grant application timeline. As you know, the grant announcement was posted on February 15th, 2023. We're currently at the Bidders Conference on February 28th. The deadline for submission of written questions to me, Michelle Craddock, is on March 8th at 5 p.m. And then any answers to received questions will be posted by March 13th on that NRD website. Grant applications are due on March 31st at 5 p.m. And we anticipate that the grant awards will be announced on May 31st, with a contract start date of June 30th. I do want to reiterate that those are estimated dates and they could vary. So now I'm going to get into talking a little bit more about kind of the actual grant announcement and application. So the grant announcement, includes a variety of sections that detail, detail about the grant. So it gives a summary of the grant, eligibility, procurement and grant contract information, terms and conditions of grant contract awards, things like that. The application, which is a separate document, includes 10 separate sections. All sections must be completed. This was sent out in a MS Word document that includes expandable boxes. You can attach photos, things like that. So the application, includes, the typical stuff: applicant information, spaces to provide a project description, project questions, information about the community, places to include photos, as well as sections where you would include a project summary, project background, project description, project benefits, and then finally a place for signatures at the end. So how will these applications be reviewed? I'll talk through kind of the eligibility criteria and the evaluation criteria on the following slides. That's also detailed in the grant announcement. So the eligibility criteria are mandatory. All projects must meet these criteria to be considered for funding. Assuming they do meet the eligibility criteria, they would go through the evaluation criteria, and those are really used to prioritize eligible projects with the categories focused on including focus, benefit, and implementation categories. Grant review team will include staff from MassDEP as well as other EEA agencies. So restoration projects, I'll talk a little bit about kind of the eligibility criteria here. So eligible projects must have a strong link to natural resources and the services they provide to ecosystems and humans that were injured by releases from the Blackburn and Union site. So that's really referring to, benefit to groundwater within that Head of Neponset sole source aquifer. Projects must restore groundwater in the geographic focus area. They must be tangible on the ground projects. They must be consistent with federal, state, or local law, regulation, or policies. Eligible projects must not focus on resources that were not injured from releases of the site. They must not restore natural resources solely outside the geographic focus area. They must not be subject to an independent prior legal obligation to perform the project. Must not be a proposal to conduct a monitoring or research study not connected to a restoration project. They must not be located on a site so contaminated or degraded as to absorb greater funding to clean up relative to restoration. And they must not use funds for continued operation, maintenance, or support of an existing restoration project or natural resource. This slide includes the evaluation criteria. There are only two evaluation criteria. I'm not going to talk through those all here. They are, again, listed and detailed in the grant announcement. But again, it includes things like proximity and relationship to injured natural resource, the magnitude of benefits, relationship to community goals, stewardship plans, any potential benefits to environmental justice communities, as well as criteria related to implementation. So things like site ownership. Does the owner of the site support the project? Soundness of approach, reasonableness of costs, and project implementation and readiness. And so again, we will use all of these 22 evaluation criteria to evaluate projects that meet the eligibility criteria. So just to give kind of a couple of examples of appropriate restoration projects, projects that restore the same or similar natural resources that were injured. That could include projects like purchase of land for aquifer protection, could include projects that conserve water, including things like water audits, leak detection surveys and repair, drought resiliency work, rate studies, and rebates for low flow fixtures, as well as projects that capture, store, and infiltrate stormwater. Examples of restoration projects that would be considered inappropriate for this grant opportunity would be projects that are otherwise required by law or permit, such as constructing a mitigation wetland required for offsetting impacts from a construction project. Another example of an inappropriate project would be a project that does not restore the same or similar resources as those that were injured, such as projects that would involve creating recreational paths or restoring upland habitat. To focus a little bit more in on the application, there are kind of 4 attachments as part of the grant announcement. The first, attachment A, is the application. This was a separate Word document. Attachment B is a detailed application requirements, and that provides details for the application, including project cost and resumes. Attachment C covers supplemental terms and conditions, and these would be applied to any grant contract that is awarded, and includes detailed requirements for invoicing regarding compensation and payment, as well as details the conflict of interest and other obligations. Attachment D includes conflict of interest certification statement, and this applies to awardees and subcontractors and consultants. And those documents would be needed if a grant award occurs. So where to submit applications? Like I've said before, applications and all supporting documents must be delivered electronically to MassDEP by 5 p.m. on Friday, March 31st, 2023. Applications must be sent to michelle.l.craddock@mass.gov. So getting into the NRD grant award process, grants may be awarded as either single or multiple awards. They will have a maximum dollar amount associated with them. It is possible if you submit an application that we might not fund the entire proposed project, so that grant award might be lower than you asked for, but we will let you know about that. Grant awards would be for a duration of 2 years from date of execution, although those could be, extended at the discretion of MassDEP. Contracts will be a Commonwealth standard contract with standard Commonwealth terms and conditions, as well as supplemental terms and conditions, which are included in that grant application and announcement. Payment will be by reimbursement. So, MassDEP doesn't give you the money up front. You will need to submit a reimbursement with documentation of how those funds were spent to receive funds. So if you have any more information or questions that you would like to ask, feel free to contact me at any point. If you have specific contract related questions, you're also welcome to contact Kathy Kiley at the information on the screen. Additionally, for those that don't have it, the link to the NRD website is located on the slide as well. So that is really my presentation. So thank you so much. I'll now open it up to any questions. Does anyone have any questions?
Great presentation.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
John, I don't know if you have questions. Go ahead if you have questions. I'll be quiet for the moment.
I'm not sure I have too many questions. It's all pretty well detailed in the RFR. So go ahead.
So I had a couple questions. One is there's potentially some interest in doing a leak detection survey with the town of Walpole, and it occurred to me to wonder whether that is something that could arguably come under the heading of something required by another permit. It's not like an enforcement order or anything, but the town does have a Water Management Act permit that I would probably have to go reread it to see exactly what it says, but it does, I think, say they have to do a leak survey at least every 3 years. Yeah, so is that the kind of thing that would be a obstacle if that's in fact the case?
I I agree. We'd have to look at the Water Management Act permit. And I've read that language and I don't know it off the top of my head. I think if it was anything kind of over and above what's required in the Water Management Act permit, I think it would be fine. But it would have, it'd have to be, something a little extra than what's, either normally done or what the Water Management Act requires them to do. So it'd have to be, I think there are some kind of like enhanced leak detection surveys that can be done. So if it was something like that, I think it would be eligible. If it's just a typical leak detection survey that they have to do as detailed in their permit, it probably wouldn't be eligible.
Yeah, and something we always urge our communities to do is to do them more frequently than the minimum requirement, and presumably, even if it's a standard thing, but you're doing more of it, and it's a good thing than is required, presumably that's okay.
Yeah, I think if it's something that's above and beyond what's required by a permit, then it likely would be eligible.
Okay. And then there's also been some discussion about maybe trying to do one of these quote unquote snazzier new AWWA water audits, which seems like a good thing, and I'm pretty sure that is not explicitly required by the Water Management Act permit.
Yeah, I don't believe it is either, but we'd have to confirm that.
And then there's also presumably stormwater retrofit kind of activity that's focused on, encouraging groundwater recharge and reducing groundwater pollution is applicable. And I guess, and there are, a couple projects that seem to be appealing to folks in that regard. And I guess my question is, potentially those may be more expensive than the amount of funds available here. And we're sort of curious with the timeline, how, if at all, receptive the trustees are to, and I realize this gets a little complicated, but sort of trying to almost sort of offer two scopes, contingent on the ability to get additional matching funds, to sort of be able to say like, okay, we've, I'm making up these numbers, but like we've got 4 stormwater BMPs we want to do, and your money's enough to pay for 2 of them, but what we'd like to do is try to use your money as a match to another grant that we don't have yet, but it's going to take 6 months before we find out if we even have that. And then if we can get the other grant, we'll do all 4, and if we can't, we'll just do 2. Is that kind of construction? I recognize it's a little complicated and indefinite, but does that seem potentially workable from the trustees' standpoint? And the other factor here is like a timing factor, right? Because if it's going to take some amount of time to get an answer on the other grant, like what's a reasonable amount of time to like wait to maybe make it a bigger project versus let's just get it done?
Those are all great questions. I mean, I think, high priority for, the trustees is to be able to try to leverage our funds for additional grants so that additional restoration can be completed. So that's certainly something, we're in favor of. I wish I had my contracting person to give some better answers on this, but I think certainly you could kind of present 2 scenarios or 2 different, scopes of work. And I'm not sure entirely like how the contract would work, whether it would be, this would be like phased, like there's some work you would do no matter what that a grant could fund. And then there would be kind of like we'd kind of do a contract for that. And then you could wait and see if you got the additional funds, and then we could do kind of a contract amendment to it to include, either, funds for just to complete the project we can if you don't get funding, or if the scope kind of, we have to go to the second scope, it could cover that. But I guess that's a little confusing, but what I'd say is we want like, all the information kind of possibilities up front so that we can get them into that, so that they're as part of this grant application, because kind of once it's awarded, I don't think we can, change the scope too much. So we want the whole universe of what might be potentially included. And, we do have some flexibility on timing. The funds are in a trust account, they don't expire. So it is flexible. So I think we could kind of see how it goes and keep in discussion on what we feel like is a reasonable timeline to wait for, additional funds to be identified. I recognize it's easier to get kind of matching funds once you have the funds in hand. So it's kind of the process you need to go through. So, I think we do have some flexibility. So I think it's a possibility and, something we just have to kind of be in discussion on, kind of how long it's taking. If it's taking 2 years to identify funds, probably might not be, kind of the timeline that we're interested in. So, but, 6 months, maybe a year, we could definitely discuss that.
Okay, and presumably if somebody wanted to propose an arrangement like that, I'm sort of assuming that if somebody proposed an arrangement like that, they would probably come in and say like, oh yes, and we plan to, seek matching funds from this place and or that place, which hopefully have a, at least approximately known timeline.
Yeah, yes, that would be very helpful.
Is it a fair guess that like if they came in with like this sort of A, B kind of approach, if you felt like the one that was looking for the match was just, oh, that's crazy, you're waiting 7 years to get the match, like we're just going to go with the B, like presumably the trustees would feel empowered to kind of, quote unquote, disassemble the proposal a little bit into
Yes, that's definitely an
option.
We've done that in the past. I think I mentioned, earlier in the presentation, you might not have been on yet, that, you can put forward a grant application, but, the award might not be in that amount. So, if things are broken out easily so that we could say like, we don't want to fund this task and just simply pull it out, that makes it easier for us to kind of pick and choose, what we want to fund, what we think is kind of the best use of the trustee funds. So that's always helpful if you do want to include multiple options.
Okay, good. And I guess my one other question is, I presume that you won't be offended if somebody comes in with a proposal for the entire pot of money, and that if you end up with multiple proposals, that sort of that same approach of like, oh, these people have a great idea over here for half the money, and okay, yeah, you asked for all the money, but we're just going to give you half because we like idea X better that you've got.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's, something, once we have all the applications, that's something we'll have to evaluate. And I would say that, sometimes we get a lot of applications and we have a bunch of really good projects that rank really high. And so we, try to figure out a way to fund all of those, but also to fund them in a way that they, can be meaningfully implemented. We're not going to just split up the money between all the good projects, but then you can't do anything with the funds because it's not enough. So that's definitely, it's a possibility. That said, if we get one great project and a couple of projects that, don't rank very high, we have in the past, awarded all funds towards one project. So all possibilities.
Okay. And then one last one, which is I don't, and you don't need to explain it, but I'm curious about sort of the historical question of how the the boundary of the sole source aquifer was defined, because it is sort of a funny geographic area from a hydrologic standpoint. And I guess, is it fair to say that provided that the proposed activities are actually, implementing the goals of the fund, that sort of like all of the odd little corners of the geography here are kind of equally eligible,
Yeah, I think if it's I mean, I would have to get back to you on how the sole source aquifer was delineated. I think it was, as you probably would guess, I think it was done a long time ago by EPA. So I don't know the details of how it was done, but I could try to look into that for you. The reason.
No need to do it. So.
Thank you. That's kind of when we did the restoration plan, that's what we included as kind of the focus area for the restoration. And so that, that pretty much locks us into doing that. But I would encourage you, any way that, you can show a benefit to the aquifer, from the project. I think, I encourage you to do that. Any little corners as significant as the next, that's the geographic focus area. So they'd all be weighted similarly.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, if that's it, I will conclude and let everyone get back to their day. But thanks so much for joining. I will be posting this on our website. Feel free to follow up with any written questions by that, I believe it's March 8th date. That is the deadline for written questions. Great. Well, thank you so much. Talk to you later.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.